Bitcoin miner Marathon Digital Holdings will no longer censor transactions, according to CEO Fred Thiel. Last month, the Bitcoin mining pool run by Marathon drew criticism from the Bitcoin community when it announced it had mined its first fully compliant block by censoring certain transactions. At the time, Marathon stated its compliance efforts came from a desire to placate investors and regulators by giving them, quote, peace of mind that the Bitcoin they produced was clean, ethical, and compliant with regulatory standards. And joining us now to discuss is Marathon Digital Holdings CEO Fred Thiel. Welcome, Fred.
Hi, how are you?
Very well. Thanks for coming on the show. So you're getting questions from institutional investors about this so-called clean Bitcoin. So let's start with that. What are these companies, family offices, and firms saying, and what proportion are expressing environmental concerns with Bitcoin?
So a couple of different questions there. On the one hand, the institutional investors have a desire to purchase Bitcoin in full compliance with regulatory norms. And OFAC compliance is important. Part of the challenge we encountered was that the interpretation of OFAC rules is a little difficult. This is a very new space. And while companies are prohibited, according to OFAC, from transacting with counterparties who are on OFAC lists, the verification of data in blocks, which is what a miner does, doesn't necessarily do that. So we were getting a lot of pushback from the community, essentially not complying with the openness and transparency of the blockchain and the network. And we were also getting feedback that, you know, the OFAC compliant coins wouldn't be able to have a premium price. And so if there's no financial incentive for Marathon to provide a different type of coin, then it's much better for us to be part of the mainstream and part of what the rest of the Bitcoin mining community do. So we decided to revisit our decision, and the video we released yesterday, it was very clear on the fact that we intend to be fully transparent and abide by the general consensus within the mining community, and using the standard vanilla Bitcoin core node that everybody else does, and not doing anything distinct. So,
so on the one hand, you were trying to appease environmentally conscious investors by producing clean blocks, but then you received a lashing from the Bitcoin community, and you tried to address, nevertheless, the investors by producing, I guess, clean blocks. Can you explain what Marathon had to do differently to accomplish that?
Sure. So again, it's slightly different. By clean, we don't mean environmentally. What we were talking about were blocks that were clean of any transactions that had been done. Exactly. So relative to clean, we are, as we declared last week, our next deployment of miners will bring us to 70% fully carbon neutral coins. But that's a separate issue. I think also the market is that, the question is still open as to whether the market will value green coins compared to non-green coins. A Bitcoin at the end of the day is a Bitcoin. They're all the same. And I think the community clearly feels that all Bitcoins should be treated the same regardless. That being said, what we were finding was that though the number of transactions that we were filtering were much less than a fraction of a percent, the simple issue that we were filtering transactions created a lot of pushback from the community. And again, the institutional investors weren't giving us feedback that the coins that were being mined without any potential OFAC non-compliant transactions in them were going to provide any benefit to them. So we were doing a lot of extra work, incurring a lot of extra expense, and incurring a lot of public rebuke, if you would, for something that at the end of the day, our customers weren't going to value. And so as any wise business person would do, we revisited the decision and said, listen, this is much better for us to be a part of the community and operate together to the best intentions of the community than doing something different that makes us stand out, especially if we're not getting any benefit for it.
So the BTC community, they said that Marathon was censoring the blockchain, which is against the narrative of Bitcoin as being uncensored, self-sovereign, etc. So Marathon will update to the standard Bitcoin Core version of 0.211 node and validate transactions on the blockchain in, you said, quote, the exact same way as all other miners who use the standard node. So what does going back to version 0.211 mean exactly, and what do you mean by going back to validating transactions the same exact way as other miners?
So I think to keep it simple, the miner node software we were using was specifically designed to be able to identify transactions from wallets that were listed on an OFAC list and filter those out. By not having to do that, we now no longer will have to use specialized software, but we can rely on the standard open source code that most miners use on a daily basis. So it's a simplification for us, actually, makes life a lot easier for us, and provides full transparency to the community.
And what, I guess, in the end, what have you learned from this whole rigmarole? What has it taught you?
Well, your user community is very important. The difference between the Bitcoin community and your traditional technology company user community is the user community are typically your customers. In the Bitcoin world, the Bitcoin community are all very passionate believers in the ethos that underlies Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies around decentralization and transparency. Whereas our customers are people who want to buy and hold Bitcoin who may not be believers in the same ethos. And so we're really deciding to focus more on the community, the important players in the community, and really being compliant with the desires and wishes of the community. Because our Bitcoin is the exact same as everybody else's Bitcoin. Our customers don't really see or value a difference necessarily. And I think that we're much better suited as a company to really focus our attentions on the community and what's best for the community.
On that note, Marathon has also been signaling support for the Taproot soft fork, which is an upgrade to Bitcoin software to improve scaling, security, as well as privacy features. So we've been talking about this for months, and everyone wants it, but no one can agree on when to activate it. So is it frustrating how slow the process is, or just a necessary consequence of having a democratic and broad consensus?
So this is actually one of the strong suits of the Bitcoin community compared to other cryptocurrency networks. The fact that it's so consensus driven and that it takes a very high percentage of the participants to agree before a change happens protects the integrity of the network and the blockchain, and really makes Bitcoin, the Bitcoin blockchain, as secure and as great a standard for record keeping, if you would, and financial transaction settlements and payments that it is. So we're very big supporters of Taproot. One of the reasons it took us longer to be able to signal Taproot is, again, we were using custom software essentially on the miners that was doing the filtering, and adding Taproot to that was a whole development effort. So we had always intended to signal for Taproot. It was just taking us much longer. By going back to the standard vanilla node, we're able to implement Taproot much faster. So that's why we're doing that migration this week.